Good evening, everybody. Here at Kulturhaus 9,5 for a reading and discussion with Ananda Devi, which was made possible also by Africa Multiple Cluster of Excellence at the University of Bayreuth. I'm very happy and very glad that Ananda Devi came finally to Bayreuth. We have been in contact for quite a while. Was never possible because she's always invited somewhere else and she's always very busy. But finally, she came to Bayreuth in spite of all the problems that we have at the moment with traveling. Lufthansa, the airport in Frankfurt used to be something else. So it was quite difficult. So we are particularly happy that you really made it to Bayreuth. Thank you for coming. And so we are very happy tonight that we can discuss, or first of all, that you will read from two of your novels. Ananda Devi is maybe the person, the writer who stands really for Mauritian literature. And this is also because she has published she has been writing from a very early age, and has been publishing from 77 to today, I think 26 novels, poems, essays, and so on. So if you look at this rhythm, so almost every 2-3 years a book, and not just a novel, but very dense books and very poetic, in a very poetic language, and also with very complex topics that she approaches. So it's really a very big oeuvre. That one of Ananda Devi. She has received quite a lot of awards, and in last June, you got the title of the Doctor Honoris Causa by the University of Silesia in how do you pronounce this correctly?
Silesia.
In Cologne. Unfortunately, we don't have any award tonight, but we are still very happy that you're with us. Maybe we have to create one for this kind of very impressive oeuvres. So the books that we will approach tonight, she writes in French. We will do it first in English because there might also be some public who doesn't understand French. And the title was also Between Mauritius and India. And I just brought two books like this one, for example, Le Sari Vert, the green sari, so playing in Mauritius. And the first novel we'll talk about tonight, also Ève de Décembre, will also be from, let's say, placed in Mauritius. And the second one, who just came out last year, Le Rire des Déesses, which takes place in, deals with persons' destinies, let's say, I don't want to reveal so much now, destinies in India. So there's her work is also not only from Mauritius, but with a universal outreach, I would say, and also about the Indian Ocean. But before starting to listen to readings and also to having some questions then about the books. I have talked too much already. Good evening. Welcome again. Sorry.
I was listening to you, so I didn't think about talking, but thank you for all that introduction. It's wonderful, and thank you for inviting me to Bayreuth and keeping on inviting me after all this time. I'm so happy, really, really happy to be here. And I was saying earlier on that in this sort of context, I feel as if I'm back in my student days at the School of Oriental and African Studies in London, but many years ago, where everybody was really steeped into multiculturalism in different languages. Every professor, every lecturer spoke either an African language or an Asian language. So I feel that this is the same kind of vibes that we get here. And it's, well, as you said, I'm invited in many different places, and I travel a lot, but in some places you feel as if you've you kind of belong in a strange way. So I sort of feel as if I belong in.
Okay, hopefully not in a strange way, but in a good way.
in a good way. So thank you for having me, and thank you all for being here.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I mean, for Bayreuthians, it would sound, I mean, fabulous. The comparison between London and Bayreuth, right? This is a very good start for us tonight. Thank you very much. Yeah, then maybe we can, but we can start with the first novel.
Yeah.
Ève de C. Descambres. Maybe, I think, as maybe not everybody tonight might have read the novel.
Yeah.
Maybe you could give us a short introduction so that we can contextualize better the parts that we will be listening to afterwards.
Yes. So it's true that this novel was published in 2006. I wrote it in 2005. But I always say that it's the novel that keeps on living, maybe keeps on giving to me also, because it has continued to be, in a way, revived in different ways. First of all, by translations, because it's been translated in about 10 different languages, but at different times. Also, it's been made into a film. And also, because it's been on the reading program for French literature in many, lycées in France, but also now in Mauritius, it means that I'm very often asked to talk about this novel, and I see its impact. For example, in the lycées in France or elsewhere, many teachers have told me that when their pupils, their students read this novel, they feel really engaged, because the main protagonists are 4 17-year-old kids from Mauritius. But although it's set in Mauritius, it's a novel that finally is very universal, because they are living in a kind of slum of the capital city of Mauritius, which is Port Louis. And it starts out with these 4 voices, 2 girls and 2 boys. The girls are Eve, who gives the title to the novel, Savita, and the boys are Sadiq and Clélio. And each one is facing terrible odds in their life, because they're living in a kind of, as I said, in a kind of slum where the parents are mostly unemployed, but they also feel abandoned by the rest of society. And of course, even at that time, in 2005, 2006, Mauritius was sort of engaged in a kind of economic development because of tourism, because of industry and everything, where you could see the disparity in the society between those who were getting rich very, very fast and those who were sort of held back by their circumstances and by their history, the history of Mauritius. Maybe we'll talk about that a bit later, but the idea of having this story told by 4 kids who each one says I. So at the different chapters is sort of entitled with the name of who's speaking, and then each one says I. And when I was writing it, I thought it's very difficult to put yourself in the place of a 17 years old, if you're an adult, also from a context which is completely different from yours. And some of the questions that I was asking myself was, should I use a language which is a kind of a youthful language? Should I use a jargon like the French in the French banlieue or in a Mauritian context? And then I realized that what I wanted to hear or to express was the inner thoughts of the protagonist. And inner thoughts have no barriers. So these inner thoughts can be poetic, they can be philosophical, they can be crude, they can be rude, but there's no limit to what they can say within that inner voice. So I chose in a way, or maybe the novel chose in a way, to speak in a poetic voice, which is what mostly is what attracts me with writing from the stylistic point of view. And these voices are poetic, but also very heartfelt, because they're speaking from their heart and from their emotions, and each one has a strategy to survive. How do they survive in a society where they feel that they have no future, where the rest of society is turning its back on them? And the main character, Eve, is the one who's mostly sort of abandoned in a way by her parents, by the rest of society, and who only has her body as her main sort of monnaie d'échange. I mean, her main, I don't know how you'd say it, way of buying things, if you like. But at the same time, she's someone who feels that even if she's selling her body, she's preserving the essential part of her, so that they're not touching her, the real her, the inner her. They're touching the body, but who she is, she's preserving very, very closely. So she doesn't present herself as a victim, but of course she is a victim. She's a victim of society. So there's this ambiguity about this character and all the characters, which maybe sometimes is difficult for young people to, when they're reading it, they sometimes say, well, we don't understand her that well. But this is what it's about. It's to sort of provoke thought, provoke any reader to sort of think, why is this happening, and how is this happening, and why can't we do something about it? And this is probably the novel where I showed after my novels before that, this is the one where I showed the dark side of Mauritius, because it starts out in the night. It's very dark, and people who hear about Mauritius, it's like this sort of sunny tropical island, beaches, sea, sun, whatever it is. And actually, it's quite funny, because at that time, sometimes I was going into a book festival, and people were coming for a book signing, and they said, "Oh, we're going for our holidays to Mauritius, so we'd like to buy your book." And I would tell them, "Well, maybe you should go first, and then buy the book later." Because obviously it's sort of, but at the same time, it is necessary to say it, because there's a culture of silence, as in many of the societies, and maybe artists, writers are those who can actually break that barrier of silence.
Well, maybe that's the moment that we would like to get into the novel.
Okay, you're right.
So then we can, maybe after that, we can have a first round of questions,
Sure.
questions or comments about the reading before we turn then to the second novel.
Yeah. So I'm going to stand, because it's somehow easier to read standing. So, as I said before, each chapter is entitled with the name of the person speaking. So in these two extracts, the first one speaking is Sad, or Sadik, who's the young man who's perhaps telling the whole story, we don't know. And then after that, it's Eve speaking. Sad. I am Sadik. Everybody calls me sad. Between despair and cruelty, the line is thin. Eve is my fate, but she claims not to know it. When she bumps into me, her gaze passes through me without stopping. I disappear. I am in a grey place, or rather yellowish brown, which better suits its name, trou marron. Trou marron is sort of funnel. where all the island's wastewaters ultimately flow. Here is where the cyclone refugees are rehomed, those rendered homeless by tropical storms and who 2 or 5 or 10 or 20 years later still have their toes in the water and their eyes pale as rain. I've always lived here. I was born a refugee. Like everyone else who's grown up in the yellow shadows of these buildings, I've never understood their monstrous edges. I never saw the gaps born beneath our feet, separating us from the world. I played with Eve. We call her the skeleton, because she was so thin, but also to mask an unspoken affection. We played at war until we found ourselves at war. We are at the bottom of the Signal Mountain. Port Louis clutches our feet, but does not pull us out. The city turns its back on us. Its muted magma stops at our borders. The mountain blocks our view of other things. Between the city and the stone are our buildings, our rubble, our trash, the eczema of paint and the tar beneath our feet. A children's playground has become a battleground, teeming with needles, shards of broken glass, hopes snaking into nothing. Here, boys clenched their fists for the first time, and girls cried out for the first time. Here, everybody has faced their realities. One day we wake up, and the future has disappeared. The sky hides the windows. Night makes its way into our bodies and refuses to leave. Night and our hormones gone wild. Us boys are ravenous. We start following girls to the shuttered factory that devoured our mothers' dreams. Maybe that's what's also waiting for them. There's nothing left of the factory but an empty metal shell and hundreds of sewing machines which carved into their shoulders that curve of despair, and into their hands those nicks and cuts like tattoos. The remnants of every woman who worked here linger on. We see they tried to bestow some humanity on this desolation. Beside each machine, there's a mauve plastic flower, yellowing family photos, postcards from Europe, and even a forgotten red beret, a strand of hair still caught in it, and religious symbols, crucifixes, Quranic verses, Buddha statues, Krishna figures, that would allow us to guess which community they belong to if we wanted to play such guessing games. When the factory closed down, they weren't even allowed to retrieve their things. It was that abrupt, that unexpected. But I realized later that they hadn't wanted to see any of it. I wonder what use all this piety was to them. In any case, all of it was left to rust and to our perverse games behind the moldy curtains. These are our traces in these stale, dingy rooms, stains of so many virginities lost here. Sometimes when the neighborhood is quiet, the island's sounds seem different. Other kinds of music, less funereal tones, the clang of cash registers, the dazzle of development. The tourists scorn us without realizing it. Money has made them naive. We cheat them out of a few rupees until they begin to mistrust our pleasant, false faces. The country puts on its sky blue dress, the better to seduce them. A marine perfume wafts from its crotch. From here, we can't see the island all dolled up, and their eyes, dazzled by the sun, can't see us, as things should be. Mothers disappear in a resigned haze. Fathers find in alcohol the virtue of authority. but they don't have that anymore, authority. Authority, that's us, the boys. We have recruited our troops like military leaders. We've carved out our portions of the neighborhood. Once our parents stopped working, we became the masters. Everybody knows we can't be ordered around, and now nobody can look in our eyes without shivering. From that moment, each of us began to live as if he wanted to be free from everything, free from rules. We make the rules. But something else has slipped into my dreams lately. I mark the walls of my room with my questions. I bloody them with the juice of words. I learn to be quiet. I learn to talk to myself. I learn to put myself together and to take myself apart. I suppose we're all like that. We go with the flow, like the others, but inside, each of us withdraws into himself and harbors his secrets. I follow in their steps and I act like I belong, as a matter of form, as a matter of survival. Eve doesn't understand that. Eve walks by, her hair like foamy night in her skin-tight jeans, and the others snigger and suck their teeth with lust. But I want to kneel down. She doesn't look at us. She isn't afraid of us. She has her solitude for armor. At night, my hormones seize on her face and describe it in long arcs of desire. When I can't bear it anymore, I go out with the gang, our noisy mopeds tormenting the sleepy old folk. In the morning, the others sink into the stupor of drugs and rage. But I go take a shower, I shave, and I go to class. This double life sucks me dry, yet nothing in the world could keep me from seeing Eve's profile in the morning at the bus stop, a sliver of sunlight playing on her ear. And then, I swear, I love words. I slip a poetry book into her bag. Later she bumps into me and her eyes bore through me. It drives me insane. To her, I dedicate all the sentences that have been darkening my walls. To her, I dedicate all my bitter suns. Our cité is our kingdom. Our city in the city, our town in the town. Port Louis has changed shape. It has grown long teeth and buildings taller than its mountains. But our neighborhood hasn't changed. It's a last bastion. Here we let our identities happen. We are those who do not belong. We call ourselves Bantumaron, the true Maronis, as if we were yet another kind of people on this island filled with so many kinds already. Maybe we actually are. Our lair, our playground, our battleground, our cemetery, everything is there. We don't need anything else. One day we'll be invincible and the world will tremble. That's our ambition. Eve. Pencil, eraser, ruler, paper, gum. I played blind man's bluff with the things I wanted. I was a child, but not entirely. I was 12 years old. I shut my eyes and held out my hand. My fingers closed on air. I shivered in my thin clothes. I thought everything was within reach. I made moonlight shine in the boy's eyes. I believed I had powers. Pencil, eraser, ruler. I held out my hand because in my bag there was nothing. I went to school completely and totally empty. I felt some kind of pride in not having anything. People can be rich of their nothings because I was small, because I was thin, because my arms and my legs was as straight as a child's drawing, the bigger boys protected me. They gave me what I wanted. They thought a gust of wind would tip me over like a paper boat with a leak in its side. I was a paper boat. Water seeped into my sides, my stomach, my legs, my arms. I didn't know it. I thought I was strong. I weighed up my chances, assessed every moment. I knew how to ask without seeming to. Pencil, eraser, ruler. What did it matter? The boys gave me things. Their faces softened slightly, and that changed everything and made them look human. And then one day, when I asked without seeming to, they asked me for something in return. I thought it would be simple, it would be easy. What could they want in return? I was the smallest one, the least important one. Everyone knew I had nothing. For once they were saying I had something. My bag held many nothings. The nothingness of my apartment, smaller and more bare than everybody else. The empty nothingness of our wardrobes, even those of our trash cans. There was the nothing in my father's eye, which alcohol had turned oily. The nothing that was my mother's mouth and eyelids, both of them stapled shut. I had nothing, nothing at all to give, but I was mistaken. He wanted a piece of me. He dragged me off to a corner of the playground behind a huge almond tree. He pinned me against the tree's trunk and he slipped his hand under my t-shirt. I was wearing a red t-shirt with a soccer player's name on it. I don't remember who anymore. His hand stopped at my breasts, slowly moved up and down, just over the small black points. There was hardly anything there. I heard other children shouting and playing. They seemed far away. It was another world. The boy had slipped his other hand in. His skin turned blotchy. His cheek was hot. He took his time, even though he was scared. I didn't feel anything. I was out of my body. It was apart from me. That day, he didn't ask me for anything else. He gave me an eraser or a pencil or a notebook. I don't remember. His lips came close to my ear. Next time, he said, we'll try something else. I shrugged, but I stared with some curiosity at his eyes. They had a silver sheen like melted sugar, as if he had been erased. Now he only existed through his hands. Now he only existed through me. For the first time, my bag was no longer empty. I had something I could pay with. Myself. I could buy, exchange myself for what I needed, exchange morsels, bits, various parts of my body. I looked brazenly at the tall boys when school was out. You want to see something? I asked them. They laughed and said, go away, there's nothing to see. But then they looked at me a long while and my eyes told them something else. I knew how to do it. I am in permanent negotiation. My body is a stopover. Entire sections have been explored. Over time, they blossom with burns and cracks. Everyone leaves some trace, marks his territory. I'm 17 years old, and I don't give a fuck. I'm buying my future. I am transparent. The boys look at me like they can see me inside out. The girls avoid me like a sickness. My reputation's been sealed.
coming back from the other world is always a bit difficult, though.
Yeah, maybe I'll just say that this is a translation, of course, of
but still.
Eve, which, yeah, it's a very good translation. And the translator is a young American young man called Jeffrey Zuckerman, and we've worked together, and he's really wonderful. I feel as if, when I'm reading it, I feel as if I'm reading my own words. In fact, yeah.
Actually, we thought we could have some comments or questions if that is wanted by the public, but we forgot to talk about this with those who organize the light and everything. Is it possible that we could have some light and have some questions now and then go back to the reading and come back to the questions and comments again? Yes. So can we have some light for the other mic that is there for... No. Okay, but I can give... So if someone is there and would like to have to make a question or a comment, I could just hand over also the mic to a person that I don't see at the moment. Otherwise, I can also start. Yeah, but yeah, okay, that's still fine. So, but you would have to raise your hand because I can't see anything. I see some silhouettes that there are some people in the room, but that's it. But actually, the film also has done the title Les Enfants de Trou-Marrant, the children of Trou-Marrant, and it also appears in the part that you have just been reading. And it's maybe you can say something about the meaning of the name of the place because and then I'll continue.
Yeah, that's one of the maybe the problems. I'm a translator myself, so one of the problems with translation is that there's certain words or expressions that are actually untranslatable. And this place name is actually not a real place name in Mauritius. And I think did I just say it earlier on? I can't, because
No.
we've had many conversations. So I can't remember. I've already said it about Trou-Marrant. So it's based on. I didn't want to use a real place name. There are places in Mauritius which are exactly what I'm describing. One of them is called Rochebois, and there are many others. But if I had used that name, that place name, the darkness of the story, the harshness, the violence, might have seemed to the people living there like a kind of... I don't know, like sort of condemning them to something, or maybe stigmatizing them. I didn't want it to be seen that way. So from the beginning, I thought I'm not going to use a real place name. Now in Mauritius, there have lots of there are lots of place names with the word trou, which means holes, and so you have Trou-Biche, which means holes of. Deer, female deer, does, let's say, or Trou-Fanfaron, which is a bit strange. But so I sort of thought of using that kind of structure of the place names with the trou, which is a hole, which is literally where these kids live, is a hole, and marron is well, first of all, the name it means brown in English, so it sort of expresses the brownness, the murkishness of that place, and so it sort of brought together the idea that it's a hole, and it's excuse me the language, but like a shithole basically, which is how people sort of look at these places. But at the same time, the word marron has a meaning which goes back to the history of Mauritius, because it's a history of slavery. And during that time, when slaves were escaping from the plantations, from the sugarcane plantations, there were they would go and live within the forests or on the mountains. And these escaped slaves were called marrons. And the whole process was called le marronnage. That word brought back the history of Mauritius into the story, even if it's not expressed openly. And at one point, one of the characters does say that we are still slaves. I mean, there are slaves in my ancestry, and we are still in chains. So, in fact, this untranslatable name does have a lot of significance, which won't be sort of come out to an English reader. But these are the vagaries of translation, that you really can't translate everything.
But I think even in the passage that you read from Eve, Eve talking, when she says she's nothing and nothingness, but now I have something, I will I can buy something for myself because I sell my body or parts of my body, which links directly to enslaved people. Yeah. In a certain way. Then there were other passages where it's also about the machines that they leave also signs on the body. That sounds nice if you say tattoos, but actually it's more like scarves. Yeah. And so let's say the body as a place of remembrance, which is also. And as you just said, it's a whole. So you are imprisoned, and so you have this very small place where they live, which seems to reflect also or to represent the whole island, and then the island also, again like one piece of a larger history in the Indian Ocean.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that maybe the major prison in the island for the society is that silence about that history, because it's a history that's fairly recent. It's not that old, but at the same time, it's something that's not spoken about, and that's been like a kind of unsolved and unresolved issue, because today, still, the descendants of the French colonizers, which are about 6 families, are still the ones who own about 30% of the land in Mauritius, which is it's a small island, but they still hold the economic power. And there's been a kind of collusion with the political power, which is mainly from. I don't want to generalize, but mainly sort of the Indian origin majority, those who came from India also as laborers in difficult conditions, but they sort of had a kind of social mobility which was much faster, because they were in a difficult situation, in a hard situation, but they were not slaves in the sense that their identity wasn't erased, the history wasn't erased, the languages were not erased. So in a way, they managed to keep all that as a kind of strength behind them. Whereas in the system of slavery, the first part of that system is to erase the identity of the people who were transported, because they were seen as objects. So the clans were sort of separated, the tribes were separated, people speaking the same language was separated, and children were separated from the parents. So that erasing of history and memory is something that is a kind of the whole of identity that's in the midst of that island, which people still haven't confronted, still haven't accepted, and still haven't repaired in a way. So of course, the Indian laborers who were brought after the abolition of slavery were also in a very difficult situation, because they couldn't go back. They were sort of, in a way, imprisoned on the plantations. They hadn't the right to go out, otherwise they were imprisoned. They were indebted for life for the passage. So I'm from that sort of kind of ancestry, and I don't have any kind of, I can't retrace I could retrace who my ancestors were, but in a way there's been no contact with these ancestors once my great-grandparents went to Mauritius. but they had a kind of strength because they could cohere, they could come together as a society, they could speak their languages, which was completely forbidden for slaves and their descendants. So I think that this hole in history and memory and identity is something that Mauritians are not prepared to face. And as long as they're not prepared to face it, this silence is going to be the sort of fault line on which that society is built. And it's a fault line which is very fragile, and one day it will explode.
I mean, this connects very well with what you read really in the very beginning, when Sade says something about the very small line between sadness and cruelty.
Yeah.
Linking to his own individual destiny and isolation, but then also opening up, of course, a window to the larger context.
Yeah.
But also, as we're talking about literature and not only about the history of Mauritius, I mean, we just had two voices, but as you explained, there are four main characters in this book, and they speak after one another. So I think even the structure of the book reflects this kind of isolation. Each person speaks as if the person would speak to him or herself. But as if there's no connection, no communication possible with a neighbor or with a friend. They are completely isolated. So I think even in the structure, this. I mean, if I say this is a very good choice, that sounds very odd. But I think. But if you read, so I just invite you to read the novel because you step from one. I mean, you follow one character to the other, but like as if going from one small cell to the next, and you listen. You're confronted with another destiny.
It's true because it's. I think it's probably characteristic of all my books that the protagonists are people who are not heard, not listened to, sometimes invisible, sometimes extremely visible, but completely sort of erased from any kind of, well, I'll use the word agency, which I don't like too much, but in a way it says what it says. So it's that kind of sort of the idea that in this novel, all these kids have no one to speak to, so they're speaking to the reader, and the reader is the one listening to their story and how they try to survive, and each one of them has a different strategy. So Eve, the only sort of way she can get something is through her body. At the same time, she says she's preserving an essential part of herself, which she feels nobody can touch. And she says at some point, I'm the predator, because she feels that she's using men to get what she wants. But of course, we know as sort of external observers that she is a victim too. And Sade is speaking also to somebody, some unknown person, about his love for Eve, but she's been so burnt and scarred by men that she can't even accept his love. And at one point, the only person who's the other girl, Savita, who's, when she says, well, I'm called the good girl, but I don't like being called the good girl. And I must say here, as an aside, that each one represents in a way through their names different communities. So Sadiq is the sort of from a Muslim community, Savita from a Hindu community, but they're all sort of linked by poverty, and that they're all living in Troumaon. So it's not as if it's only one community who's poor there. At one point, one of them says, our identity is that we're poor, and that's all the identity we have. But when Eve and Savita come together, that's the only time when Eve feels that she's received a kind of generous love that's not possessive, that's not trying to pull a bit something from her body or scar her body or leave marks. So that's when she feels as if she's heard and seen. So between the two girls, there's a very precious relationship which emerges and which might sort of give a kind of hope that something will happen to help them get out of this situation. But then I said in a different context that the story is written like a Greek tragedy, that in a way the choices that Eve makes to get out, to escape, are the choices that will actually trigger the whole tragic sequence of the story. So in my mind, I was a little bit thinking of a Greek tragedy with Atrides, like, I don't know if you say Atride, like the Orestea, Oedipus, and all that, where every action, Oedipus, his life is a sequence of tragic sequence through destiny and through chance, so if you like. So in a way, that story is a bit like a Greek tragedy, because every action that Eve, every decision that Eve makes, in a way, will end with the tragedy.
Which is, I mean, I don't even know, I should have maybe also have a look at, because there's a third, I think you also have prepared the mic, a third voice.
Yeah.
Maybe we could hear the third voice and then come back to the to the discussion. Or discussion. As I told you, please make some noise or something that I know if someone wants to speak. I mean, at least something like this, maybe.
Okay. Voices, but I'll probably, not to tire you too much, I'll just read from the one of the remaining voices, which is Clélio, and then perhaps back to Sad. Are you tired of the reading?
Okay, there's a reaction, finally.
Because sometimes readings are tiring. Okay. Okay, so the third character I'm going to read from is Clélio, who's like a little, he thinks he's a strong man, but he's actually probably the most fragile of all of them. So, Clélio. I'm Clélio. I'm at war, fighting everybody and nobody. I can't get away from my rage. Someday I know it. I'll kill someone. Don't know who. Maybe my parents, or some boss, or one of my guys, or a girl, or myself. Don't know who. I'm Clélio. You know who I am, so don't you mess with me. I've got enough anger to fill 10 leaking lives. I've done all sorts of jobs. The only one left is to kill someone. And then sometimes I sing. When I sing, people listen. Well, at least they stop. I stop their lives and their hearts. My voice pierces infinity, Sad told me. He doesn't talk like anybody else here. My voice makes metal shiver, apparently. The buildings stop crushing man, cement loosens its grip, walls turn nostalgic, girls go rosy. But I don't fucking sing for shit. A couple of times they asked me to sing at a wedding. Everyone just stares at me beaming like idiots, and I want to punch their faces in. To see them standing around in their nice clothes, their shoes so tight, their toes look ready to pop out like horns. And they are like acting like nothing's wrong, stuffing their mouths and boozing like they're not miserable and skint. It makes me want to shove the smiles down their throats. I tell myself that if one more old lady asks me to sing Marinela, I'm kicking her straight to hell. I'm no good when I drink too much. One beer, and I'll knock over the tables and the bride. One time I even jumped on the bride to pull off her veil because I knew it was a mask. If they hadn't held me back, I'd have pulled away her dress too, and all the oaths she'd taken. I must have been born that way. I must have seen the future and decided I didn't like it. So when I see nails, I feel like swallowing them or forcing someone else to swallow them. I've been through prison for assault and battery many times. I wasn't ever there for long because I'm a minor. Next year, when I'm 18, the punishments will be worse. The judges, if they're men, lecture me. If they're women, they go weak when they see how my eyes look like a kid's. They go soft and try to tell me, implore me to do better. I know I won't change, though. I'm a little snot, a little shit. I'm Cleliu, dirt poor bastard, swallower of everyone else's rusty nails. What can you do? Nobody changes just like that. Sad. They tell me I'll succeed, but success doesn't mean the same thing for everyone. It's a slippery word. In my case, it simply means that locked doors could open just a bit, and I could, if I sucked in my stomach, slip through and escape Trou-Marron. Everybody knows poverty is the harshest of jailers. Still, the teachers say everything is possible. They tell me how they too once learned their lessons by candlelight. But I can see in their eyes just how dim their minds are as a result. They insist, seize your opportunities, don't hold back your country. But who do they mean by your? Stereotypes are made for us. We fill them all. We are the champions. The teachers allude to success as if they were talking to me without entirely believing what they're saying. They look at me surreptitiously. You can make miracles happen. It's true, I have a good memory. I'm a sponge. I absorb everything. And I'm a bladder. I pour everything out. Apparently that helps for success. Swallow and expel. But I make good use of them. I go to class. I pass my tests. I lead a double life. Night with the gang, day with the sages. I well remember the day I split into two. During French class, the teacher, a young woman with skin as jaundiced as her canary yellow blouse, and who didn't stay for long. And for that reason, I say she was only there for me at that moment, like fate knocking on my sleepy head. The teacher said, "We're going to read poems by someone of your age." As soon as they heard the word poetry, the boys pretended to retch and covered up their ears while making rude noises. But she read those poems anyway in the middle of this ruckus, and also this boy's letters in her small trembling voice. She started. No one's serious at 17. On n'est pas sérieux à 17 ans. At first I thought to myself, he's wrong. For us, 17 is very serious. But then I heard, instead of her feminine voice, the harsh voice of a teenager talking about his hopes, his rebellion, his wounds, his wishes, and even more than that. He was talking about the world, his and mine. And suddenly I felt keenly that he was talking to me. And only me. Yes, directly to me. He was saying, I am your brother. She read a poem where he was saying that vowels had colors. And the truth of it made me sit bolt upright. I too saw colors in words. Just as the island unfurled its blues and oranges, so the words unfurled still more vividly purple rages in my head. When she was done, she said, this poet's name is Rimbaud. I am your brother. I am your double. I am your single. I have split completely and totally in two. I was sad, sitting transfixed in my stiff chair, and I was someone else, unmoored, observing things, but pushing them away through his thoughts, his defiance, his mortality. That night, lying in bed, I took a marker and began writing on the wall by my head. Of course, I wrote about Eve. She alone occupied my thoughts. I began talking to her directly, saying you instead of she, guessing where she was going, what she's thinking, what she's living. She doesn't know that I've figured her out. I've written so much about her that sometimes I think I'm actually writing her life and other people's lives and all our lives. I read in secret all the time. I read in the toilet. I read in the middle of the night. I read as if books could loosen the noose tightening around my throat. I read to understand that there is somewhere else a dimension where possibilities shimmer.
Thank you very much. I think again, this let's say the words like jail, everything that is prison, come up again quite strongly. What I think is, at least for me, so like one of the major tones that carries us through the text. But that poetry can open this jail. But it's what this text also links to the first reading, I think, is also the absence. Okay, in other parts they are there, but more or less the absence of adults, as if they are also locked in their own world. So there's not really the past, not of that of the island, not that of the parents. They say repeatedly, there's no future. So you're really also like stuck in the present. There's no way out, not in a temporal sense, not in a spatial sense, there's no way to go, which gives this, I think, this very strong feeling of imprisonment, which is, yeah.
But I think that what is the main sort of direction in which I've been going all this time is that with all these imprisonments in which we all are, it's not just in Mauritius or anywhere else, we're imprisoned by society very often, by rules of society, by what is imposed on us as our roles, our functions. And how sometimes we're imprisoned by ourselves, because sometimes we are afraid of being, simply. And in all my books, all these characters are alone, that's true. There's nobody else coming to their help, but there's also no sort of higher power coming to their help. Nobody is going to try to pray to get out of their situation. So what I'm saying is that finally that strength of being able to free oneself is inside oneself, and that all of them go through a sort of a quest to find themselves and to find that strength to resist, to be themselves, and to find out who they are. And I think this is what I've been sort of progressively going towards, which means that some of my earlier novels are very tragic, but in some of the perhaps later one, like Indian Tango, at the end, the protagonist sort of walks by and feels as if she's sprouted wings because she's divesting herself of all those familial sort of rules and imprisonment. And that book does end with her saying, "I feel as if I sprouted wings." And I think maybe this is what I do feel, is that we are so sort of, in a way, subsumed and subdued by all these social, societal rules and sort of imprisonment, that in the end we lose sight of who we are in reality. That it's not somebody else's look on ourselves which makes us who we are. And in many of my novels, that people who are called monsters are not monsters, because it's the difference which make people think of them as monsters. And in the end, it's the other, the I of the other, which is the monstrous sort of aspect of society. And difference is very important in all this, that people who are different feel as if they are completely sort of marginalized, set aside, and society makes monsters of them. But in fact, who are the monsters? This is what I'm trying to sort of ask them to think, or the reader to think, who are the monsters?
Yeah, I think maybe this. So if there are some questions or comments now, we can arrange this. So please, otherwise we would move on to the next text and switch languages for a while. I see someone here, so maybe you come. I hand over to. Just wait. So I think there's a mic there.
Yeah, I don't see anything either. Yeah. Okay.
Hello. Hey. Yes. Ananda, thank you for the reading. It was beautiful, I'd like to say. Yes, and I would like to ask you if the quality, the sound quality of the words, if they play a role when we are talking about the translation about your work. Mm-hmm. Because for me, yes, I don't know if you had theater lectures, but your reading here was also very, yes, it's important to the effect of the book. Mm-hmm. So what kind of sonority quality the words play when we are talking about this romance?
Yeah, thank you. Well, first of all, in my French writing of this year, the sound is extremely important, because I have a sort of my writing is very close to poetry, so especially this novel, Yves F. de ces Décombres, I wrote it with a kind of poetic sort of mindset, if you like, and I worked also on the language in the same way, with the musicality, with a sonority, with words attracting another, because of alliteration, because of a cadence. Sometimes when I'm listening to music, it translates into the cadence of the sentence, and I let it translate into it, because it's important for me to have that the writing experience and the reading experience is a totality, not just an intellectual exercise. Even for writing, is not for me. It's not intellectual. It's more like a sort of whole emotional and physical, sensorial, if you like. That everything goes into that text. So I'm not thinking of the words before I write them down. They're sort of dictating the sounds, and the cadence and the rhythms are dictating the writing. So obviously, when it was being translated, at first it's a bit strange, because when you're reading, it's not the same cadences, it's not the same. But I've been lucky in that this translator, first of all, he did all the first draft and then sent it to me, and then in some cases where the meaning was very metaphorical and very difficult to work out, he said, "Well, what did you really mean by this?" And we worked out together. But I thought the important thing with translation is that when you read it, you don't feel that it's a translation. And this is the most important thing. So I don't mind that they go a bit further or you know, change a little bit just because it has to feel natural. When I'm reading it, I don't feel like it's I don't know about all of you, but you know, it doesn't feel as if it's a translation. So it's not the same music, definitely. If I had, I don't have the book with me. Maybe I should have. Well, I have it in my hotel room. I should have brought it and maybe read a passage in French to see how it feels. It's not the same music, but there's a music in there, and the poetry is there. So I think this is marvelous with languages, is that we're able to not just to translate meaning, but to translate all these sort of hidden places, hidden parts, and it's an enormous pleasure. I love translation, and I love reading a well-translated book when you don't feel that it's translated, you know. So, but definitely music, poetry are very important in what I write, and I would say as important as the story, and yeah, as I said, it's an emotional and sensorial sort of feeling, even when it's crude, you know. It's sort of in a way, Clélio's part came to me because of who he is, but at the same time, even that crude part was part of the rhythm and the harshness of some of what he says. So yeah, this is part of my way of writing, basically. Yeah.
I thought there was another question. Yes. Mm-hmm. Although this question would have been and answer would have been the perfect transition to the French reading. So I was a bit like, could we ask this later? But no, please go ahead.
I mean, we don't know when it's ending, so it's also an opportunity to say something. Thank you very much for these readings. We are looking forward to more, but I just wanted to make a kind of testimony as well, because listening to this novel in English it gives another feel to some of us students of Francophone studies who had to, it's a kind of testimony, because my first semester I had to to read a lot of novels from the Indian Ocean. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and
you had the pleasure to, not you had to
read.
No, it's a testimony, because it was quite interesting to see that my first reading was on the Indian Ocean. I have to mention it that way, because somebody has nothing to. I didn't even expect what I read, actually. So that's why I'm even putting it that way, mm-hmm. which is amazing, because this is how we got in contact with that, with Indian Ocean literature. Mm-hmm. I could even mention Jean-Luc Harimanana, who was also here, and you talking even about the music, the melody, and everything. We could see that in the book as well. Yeah. So we are not bored to be here, so don't worry about that. The other, my questions and maybe comments will be the on this particular novel, which could also be read as which I see as a trauma narrative, which comes out with a lot of resilience tactics. When we look at the experience of the characters, mm-hmm. and even the passages that you read. We see how these characters are actually trying to deal with this trauma that they kind of can't speak about it. If de ces décombres, we know the character, we know the context, we know the environment where this character is growing, and the other characters as well. But the language she uses, the way she looks at herself, the strong part, the resilience and resistance part of reading herself not as somebody who's selling her body, but really looking at her as a fighter, in a way, makes it really interesting. It's the same reading that we do with Clelio, who is also in a way trying to go through this trauma of being imprisoned, being not recognized, and so on and so forth. So I would like to hear you about that as well, because even as a writer creating this trou marron, and we know what this, I don't know if it's an oxymoron of trou and marron anyway, because marron we also know of escaping from this traumatic experience and condition. So this is what really struck me at the beginning reading this, and it comes back to I had to, in the sense that it's really traumatic reading it from the condition, the violent state and condition of the people, making it also. I mean, we feel it also in your writing. I would even say in French. It's. I don't know if it's a pity that, we couldn't even hear this in French as well, because it's a very poetic language, which carries this music, but of course also the part of, I don't know if it's draining the tragic part of it into creating a language which helps to overcome the unspeakability of this tragic, of this trauma. I could stop here for now.
Okay. Well, maybe I'll read from that. Okay.
A short passage,
Yeah.
So or maybe just skip then the other book. No, that would be, we have to go to India.
Okay.
So was there another question? But maybe
well,
you can
no, maybe I'll answer this one first before I forget. Sorry. Of course, thank you, and it's very important to me to hear these your témoignages. And it's true that each one of them has a strategy for survival, or tries to have a strategy for survival. So that's why we hear these different voices. But for Eve, the point is that she feels as if her body is something and her self, inner self, is something else. And they're two separate entities almost, because this is the only way she can survive. And which is the case actually in many of my books about this dichotomy between body and self, because especially for women's bodies, because it's not their own. It's a body that is often sort of possessed in many different ways, but by others, by their functions. So they have to be a daughter, a sister, a wife, a mother. So that the body is sort of subject to different roles and functions, but inside the person, the self is the same person, is the same self who's going through all these sort of different stages of life, but it's sort of morcelé, fragmented, because of the expectations, because of the look of others, because of the way of these functions, or the way that the body has to be hidden and has to be denied, so for all my life, probably, I've been writing about how to reconcile these two parts, how to make that person become whole, irrespective of who is looking and who's what function and who they are, which I think is extremely difficult, because women are defined very often by the roles they're playing. And so in Eve we have this really, she herself says that they take my body but they don't touch me. So she's done this sort of separation to preserve herself. And at the end of the novel, there's at one point where she's sort of, she can't face this violence anymore, and she asks her mother to shave her head because her hair is what people hold her by. Her father pulls her hair, tears her hair out, and she feels it's a symbol of femininity, but a symbol that at the same time denies her humanity, denies who she is as a person. And she asks her mother to shave her head off, which is a very powerful, symbolical sort of gesture. So definitely each one of those characters goes through the same, I mean, a different type of path. And Clelio, who's that little sort of who violent, wants to kill people, etc. In the end, when he finds himself in prison for a crime he didn't commit, suddenly becomes the most fragile and vulnerable of all of them. And I did sort of feel a kind of terrible tenderness towards him, because it was like my child who's in prison, and he's sort of saying, if I get out of this, I will reform myself, I'll become a priest if needs be, you know. And he's sort of, and he's waiting for a brother who's left Mauritius, who's gone to France, is waiting for his brother to come back. So all of them have this kind of, you know, going through it. A terrible, terrible path, and Sade is sort of trying to emulate Rimbaud, and so I think that it's a tragic story, but at the same time, if it makes the readers think about, you know, the absence of possibilities and hopes for these kids, and makes them think about, you know, why violence happens in this kind of situations. When Sade says it's not violence, it's the resistance of those who despair. This violence is not violence, it's la résistance des désespérés. It's the resistance of those who are despairing, which is true. And it's actually how the whole story started in my mind, because in 2005 there were lots of riots in France in the sort of suburbs of Paris and all that, and you could see images on the screens, you know, of young people sort of burning cars, you know, breaking shop windows and all that. And there was lots of discourses about it. You know, you could hear politicians, the journalists, maybe sometimes sociologists, but not that often. You know, all sorts of different discourses about them. But you never heard them. You never heard what they really were thinking of and what really provoked that. So that this story was about getting into their heads and trying to see, well, where does it come from, that violence, and how does it, you know, it's not sort of, it doesn't come out of nowhere. It comes from something very deep inside. And this is basically what I was wanting to find out, is what's in their mind and how does it, you know, result in these tragedies. And unfortunately, I mean, as I said, this book came out in 2006 in French, and it's still valid today, and it's still universal in a way, because what I was reading today, it could have happened, it could be happening anywhere, I think. I mean, for those of you who come, well, anywhere in the world, actually, you can relate to it and know that it could happen anywhere.
No, I don't dare to rush anymore, but if I forget something. Was there another comment or question? Sorry that I have to look at this.
We don't see anything from
you.
here.
Otherwise, this would maybe be the moment to have a short reading also in French for the feeling and the rhythm.
Should I read from?
Yeah, borrow us the book, please.
Merci.
Thank you very much.
So, which one should I read now? So I won't read something that I've already read in English, but doesn't matter. I think it's the same story and the same voice. So it's Eve speaking. Ève. L'eau et ses remous, ses lignes, ses marbrures, ses brusques changements de sens. Je passe des heures à regarder le ruisseau courir pour rien. Des couleurs se glissent sous sa transparence lorsque le soleil le heurte de face. Moi aussi je glisse en avant, porté par le temps, porté par rien. Les immeubles sont en face de moi. Je n'ai pas peur d'eux. Je les mets au défi de me regarder en retour. Ils condamnent à mort tous ceux qui y naissent, mais ça ne change rien. Tout le monde est condamné. Les enfants ont les yeux délavés de couleurs et de ciel. Moi, je connais depuis longtemps la froideur du métal. C'est elle qui m'a inoculé sa force liquide. Ce quartier était un marécage au pied de la montagne. On l'a comblé pour construire ses blocs, mais ils n'ont pas comblé l'odeur du goémon, ni l'incertitude du sol. On ne pousse que les cadavres des ronces et des rêves. Déjà, certains immeubles se penchent. Bientôt, on aura notre tour de Pise à nous, la 8e merveille du monde, le quartier de Trou-Marron. Assise sur une butte non loin, je fume et je les regarde. Il y a une garde au bas de chaque bloc. Les points lumineux des joints ponctuent le cercle fermé. Les garçons font des pactes, établissent des règles, forment des allégeances. L'esprit de la horde. Si tu tiens à ta vie, à ton corps, si tu es une fille, si tu es un vieux, tu as intérêt à faire un grand détour. Ils étalent autour d'eux une mare d'huile dans laquelle se reflètent les faces assommées des gens et l'envers de leurs pas. À cette heure, personne ne marche, tout le monde court. Une pavane mortelle a lieu. Pour eux, la plupart des femmes recèlent la même lourdeur, ce trou qui est une porte d'entrée infranchissable et ouverte et dont ils ne connaissent pas le secret. Alors ils vont à la chasse, comme les centaines de chiens errants qui arpentent la vie, la ville dans tous ses sens, et la déchirent. Même Sade, qui est un peu différent, qui pense à autre chose qu'à l'évasement de nos cuisses, fait partie d'une bande. Il n'a pas le courage de se démarquer, d'être seul, de suivre une autre courbe. Il n'a aucune idée de ce qu'il y a en nous. Cette eau trouble, ce monde glauque, ce sourire lointain d'une nuit de lune, quand le vent vient nous dire des choses à la bouche qui nous rendent pensives et tristes. Sade parle de poésie quand nous sommes seuls, mais il n'a aucune idée de la poésie des femmes. La poésie des femmes, c'est quand Savita et moi, on marche ensemble, en synchronisant nos pas pour éviter les ornières. C'est quand on joue à être jumelles, parce qu'on se ressemble. Nous portons les mêmes vêtements, le même parfum. Nous avons l'air de danser. Nos boucles d'oreilles teintent. Elle a une pierre minuscule à l'aile du nez, comme une étoile. La poésie des femmes, c'est le rire, dans ce coin perdu, qui ouvre un bout de paradis pour ne pas nous laisser nous noyer. Mais ces instants-là sont brefs. Quand je suis seule, je replonge dans ma noirceur et je sais que je vais mourir. Je décide de rentrer. Le ruisseau n'est pas profond, mais je préférerais rester là et écouter sa voix plutôt que les grossièretés qui clapotent quand je passe. Merci.
Bon, je crois le rythme et la sonorité de ce texte nous portent peut-être vers les autres horizons.
Yeah, English.
In English, yeah, but it was, yeah. I thought, so I said that maybe this reading, the sounds and also the rhythm of this passage will maybe take us to other horizons, so that we can, because time is running, unfortunately. can talk about the most recent novel that came out last year, Le Rire des Déesses. I don't even know, it's not translated yet, The Laughter of the Goddesses, which would take us to India and to other monsters. I mean, other persons who are considered to be, who are outcasts of the society. So we will find this trope again in this novel, even though it's really a very different one from what we just heard and talked about. But I will leave it up to you to maybe to give a little bit more of context before we can have the reading in French. Well, please.
Yes, well, it's book that was inspired directly from an experience I made in India a few years ago. I was invited to a book festival in Calcutta, although the book is not set in Calcutta, but the organizers of the festival asked me if I would like to visit or to meet women who had an association that was helping children, especially daughters of prostitutes, working in the red district of Calcutta, and we're trying to sort of get the daughters especially out of that sort of vicious cycle of poverty and prostitution. So of course I said yes, and I went there. On the day I went there, it was during the monsoon, so the rain was sort of heavy rains were falling, and arrived in that, and that association was actually working in the middle of that red light district, and that I arrived in a sort of little road which was overflowing with rain, and all along that road you had little sort of rooms over three stories. And in front of each room, a woman was sitting and waiting, dressed in very beautiful, colorful clothes with flowers in their hair, a lot of fake jewelry, but really dressed up and waiting for clients. And at the same time, I saw children playing in the sort of gutters in the rain, and especially little girls. And it got me thinking about, what's happening to these kids while they're waiting for their mothers to work. And I met this association, and they said that they're trying to actually take care of the children while the mothers work, and try to get them sort of into the educational system, or to bring teachers to teach them. And especially the girls, because that was their main focus. Because obviously once those little girls become, are sort of 13 or 14, maybe even younger, you can think of what's going to happen to them, in that situation. And then they said something that was really sort of that made me sort of sit up in the midst of all this experience, which was already very harsh. They said, we especially take care of the daughters during the time of the major religious festivals in India, especially the pilgrimages towards the Ganges or to different places of worship, because these pilgrimages sort of take a long time, people on the roads, and the prostitutes follow these pilgrimages because that's when they get the most work. That's when their services are required during that time on the roads, when men are on the road. And they said it very matter-of-factly, but to me, I sort of was almost jumping, thinking, well, these men are going on pilgrimages, religious pilgrimages, and these women have to sort of fulfill their needs, But when these men reach the Ganges and plunge into it and wash themselves, they are sort of, they wash themselves of their whatever sins, they've committed. But these women have no possibility of, whether it's a sin, I mean, sin is a very charged word, but they have no possibility of any kind of redemption or change of their status. Once they're in that status, they are condemned to that status. They can't get out, basically they can't get out. There's no way out of it. And that sort of, hypocrisy was so shocking. Although I know of these things, of course I know that it's a hypocritical society and everything, but just that sort of juxtaposition of the religious pilgrimages and using the women's bodies, it really then sort of immediately sort of made me think I must write about this. It's not possible because India is sort of considered such a sort of spiritual society and all that, but in a way we know it's such a patriarchal society, and with these sort of hierarchies, a hierarchical society, and those who are at the bottom really have no choice and no way of getting out of it. So I started thinking about that novel, but I also started thinking about the little girls whom I saw playing in the gutters. And so finally the story started to cohere around one prostitute who has a daughter, and who in a way rejects her daughter because it's too much if she accepts her daughter and allows herself to love her, it's like too much guilt because she's condemning her to the same type of life. So in a way, from the beginning, the mother puts her child behind a kind of partition, rejects her, and the child grows up behind the partitions, but watching what's happening in that brothel. And the child becomes the sort of main heart of the novel, what is going to happen to the child. And so I introduce a religious man, a Swami, who has a temple and who's the sort of who has all the powers. He's a Brahmin, which is the highest caste. He's a man. He has money because people, pay for his services, and he wants to be almost a divinity because he has his own statue in his temple, so that people come and pray to his statue, in front of him. And he comes and uses, also asks for the services of the prostitutes. But when he sees that little girl, he falls in love with her. And then he decides to kidnap her, basically. And so that story was very clear in my mind. But when I started writing it, I thought I would write it in the third person, although very often I write in the first person. And I thought I'd write it in the third person because I don't know who I'm identifying with out of these three main characters whom I was thinking about. But slowly, as I was writing it, I started feeling that there was somebody who was there saying I, we, and who wanted to be part of that story, and I wasn't the one telling the story. But while thinking of the whole environment of that little street, I thought about another category of people who are, like the prostitutes, extremely visible physically and extremely invisible sort of inside, mentally and emotionally and everything. And that part is a community in India which are called the hijras, which are women born in men's bodies. And it's a very ancient community. I mean, it's even in the mythologies and all that, they talk about them. But these men dress as women and sometimes go through a ritual of castration, but they're also completely marginalized. So they're at the same time a bit mythical because they're considered, they can bring their blessing during a ceremony, a religious ceremony. At the same time, the rest of the time, they have to beg for their life, to live, or they have to prostitute themselves. and they don't even have an identity. I mean, they didn't have the right to have an ID card until about 2014, when some associations sort of militated for them to have it, because without an ID card you can't work, you can't do anything basically. So when this idea came to me, I thought, well, maybe one of them is telling the story, and I got this character called Sadhana, who was as a young child, liked to dress up as a girl and dance, and then his family sort of pushes him away, and he becomes part of this Hijra community. So they were both like sort of extremely visible and at the same time extremely invisible sort of groups of people, and they all sort of cohere around this little girl, because once she gets kidnapped by that man, they decide they have to go and save her. So then they go with the pilgrimage, because the Swami decides to take on a pilgrimage and wants to say she's a reincarnation of Kali or something like that. So the women actually follow that pilgrimage as they do, but this time it's not to. It's actually to get back the daughter and take revenge on this man. So, and as an aside, I had started the story before the pandemic, but during the pandemic, since I was at home, I sort of was really writing it to finish it. But the world was such a, I mean, there was so much anxiety in all this, especially at the beginning in 2020, during the lockdowns and all that. And I thought, how am I going to finish that story? Because in reality, that little girl, realistically, nothing would save her once that man had taken her. But because it was during the pandemic and everything was going so badly for the world, I thought I can't have a tragic ending to that story. So in a way, because of the pandemic, it had a happy ending. And I saw also that laughter came back all the time, that sometimes they were laughing together out of, sometimes out of anger, it's a laughter of anger, sometimes it's a laughter of complicity between the women, sometimes it's a laughter of despair, but at the end it becomes a laughter of hope, because that little girl becomes the focus of their hope. So this is why in the end the title was The Laughter of the Goddesses, because in the midst of all this spirituality, this mythology of Hinduism and everything, the real goddesses were these women who were actually the untouchables or downcast of that society. So that's the story of Le Rire des Déesses.
A very complex story. If I put it on the program for my students,
someone will be forced to read it.
Yeah. They will suffer. Because then I think they come to a class of African literatures, I mean the Indian Ocean, and then they are taken to India and to a whole, to another universe. But actually, which is very, everything is very linked. Maybe just the little girl who's like the main character, everything is turning around her. I found it also interesting because her mother doesn't give her a name.
Yeah.
And then she's looking for a name for herself. Yeah. And she calls herself Fourmi, Shinti, what I found really aren't.
Yeah, actually, because in fact, of course, there's this kind of confrontation between the patriarchy and these women. But at the same time, I didn't want to become sort of, a sort of polarization between men and women. So the mother is a very flawed character as well. As I was saying at the beginning, she rejects the child to the point that she doesn't give her a name. So she puts her behind a wall and she hardly feeds her. And it's only when the child is in danger that she will actually discover what it is to have, what a mother's love is. And that's when she discovers it. But she has this path also which she has to follow. So the child grows up without a name, and at some point when she's about 9 years old, she thinks, well, I need a name. And she's trying to think of names, whether she'll have Bollywood actress name, but she says, no, these women are so beautiful, they belong to another universe, I can't take this name. And then finally she thinks of the little ants that sort of go through the corners and holes, and nobody sees them, but they see everything. And so she decides to call herself Chinti, which in Hindi means the ant, la fourmi. And so this is how she has to sort of give herself her own identity, in fact.
So I think we will be listening to the French text, but I know that there are quite some people here with us who also understand French, so that we could also have questions and comments in both languages afterwards.
Yeah. So I won't get up because it's getting tiring. Chinti, à 10 ans, est toujours à l'aise entre les murs de la maison, comme dans un corps aux 1000 secrets. Elle aime observer les femmes en cachette, tandis qu'elles dorment ou s'habillent, se lavent ou se maquillent. C'est son théâtre personnel. Dans leur espace exigu, chacune se crée un monde avec des photos d'acteurs, des images pieuses ou des colifichets. Pas de photos de famille, toutes sont mortes pour leur famille et inversement. Même si les souvenirs de ce passé qu'elles dissimulent soigneusement sous les plis de leurs vêtements, ce passé de tombes et de regrets, de trahison et de rejet, résistent encore. Car comment faire face à ce qu'elles sont ? Si elles parviennent parfois à abolir l'absence et surtout le grand vide de demain, les rares instants où elles sont livrées, corps alanguis, à elles-mêmes, rien ne peut les protéger de la brûlure de la mémoire, ni du poids de leur lucidité. Où pourraient-elles trouver une quelconque consolation ? Dans les murs qui larmoient ou les quelques billets de banque qu'elles cachent sous une brique ? Ou bien dans ces yeux qui leur lancent leur propre impuissance au visage comme un jet d'acide ? Laissez-moi rire. Ce pays a trop de tout. D'hommes, de femmes, d'enfants, de pauvres, de faibles, d'animaux, d'insectes, de tristesse, de mémoire, d'histoire, d'illusions. Long fleuve de corps abandonnés, rendus inutiles par cet inconcevable excès. Tout y existe et tout y est détruit. Tout y est donc dispensable. Les douleurs ont les mains fermées sur les chevilles et tirent encore, sachant qu'un jour, elles lâcheront prise. Mais pas les femmes de la ruelle. Elles sont tellement habituées à lutter, encaisser, se relever et encaisser encore, qu'endurer leur semble normal. L'ordre immuable, celui dont lequel on ne se rebelle pas. Ce qui importe, c'est de se relever, peut-être une dernière fois. Au lieu de se laisser aller à réfléchir, elles lavent donc leurs longs cheveux, les font sécher au soleil et les démêlent soigneusement, se mettent du vernis à ongles fuchsia sur les orteils, ravaudent leurs blouses élimées, contemplent les voiles et les saris qu'elles préfèrent, parce que tout cela fait partie des bonheurs permis, des petits plaisirs qu'il leur est encore possible de savourer et qui leur fait oublier leurs peaux usées, entaillées, 1000 fois recousues. Chinti le regarde et tente de comprendre, de décoder le langage de leur corps, de leur regard. Elle sait que ce qui sort de leur bouche est mensonger. Elles ne disent jamais ce qu'elles pensent. Mais la vérité surgit dans la courbure d'une nuque, la dérobade d'un œil sombre, l'incertitude d'une bouche, le soupir qui ne se délivre qu'à moitié. La vérité dans la bouteille de faux whisky, presque de l'alcool pur, teint d'un colorant ambré qui se vide lentement à côté du lit. La vérité dans le murmure qui sort alors de leur gorge comme un chant ignoré d'elle-même, une harmonie brisée. Chinti finit par les connaître mieux qu'elle-même et certainement mieux que sa mère. Elle les comprend sans qu'elles aient besoin de prononcer un mot. Elles sont aussi conscientes d'elles. Elles connaissent l'origine des crissements et des frottements dans les cloisons. Elles se sentent presque consolées par ce regard curieux qui les observe, sans rien demander en retour. Elles savent comment elle retient son souffle lorsqu'elle se maquille, lorsqu'elle trace le trait précis du col au-dessus de la paupière et pose le bindi juste au centre du front, puis ourlent leur bouche du pourpre de raisin mûr. Comment elles cachent un rire lorsqu'elles se regardent nues dans le miroir brisé, prenant des poses de stars pour l'amuser. Un sourire alors né dans leurs propres yeux si fatigués. Ce regard de crépuscule mourant, éclairé par l'étoile Chinti. Quand elles ont enfin droit au sommeil, elles chantonnent d'une voix abîmée par les mauvaises cigarettes et l'alcool, des berceuses presque oubliées, pour endormir Chinti et la garder un peu plus longtemps auprès d'elle, dans un petit coin de tendresse. Voilà.
Bon, là, je crois, bon, là, encore une fois, le rythme et la mélodie, les sonorités, peut-être même en français. Yes. I was saying, I think in this reading, I mean, even if you might not understand the rhythm and the melody is very, how do you, I don't know, would take you as a listener away. Or it takes you into this, but it seems to be like a very, very. C'est très doux. It sounds very nice, but what it's talking about is not that nice, actually. But I mean, you find very poetic images to describe this, this life between absolute despair and some glimpses of hope.
Yeah.
What I found interesting that, I mean, Chinti, as we were just talking about her, that they find it as a consolation as well, that she's there and she is watching them all the time and she knows everything about them, as if, so while we talked about this, the gaze of the society that might isolate them, but here we have a completely different gaze, which sees them, what's this different gaze of this child, which is just curious but very open as well, would just see the women and just also accept everything what they are doing, and then they create this kind of, they are getting very close, and there was something about le coin de la tendresse, this tenderness that can appear in the middle of this despair. So changing gazes, I found this very interesting.
That's true. I didn't think about it actually really, but because I thought that they were seeing in her a possibility of a different life, a different future for them. But it's true what you're saying, is she's the only one who sees them for who they are and who admires them, who loves them, who looks at them with a kind of enchantment because of their beauty and their inner and external beauty. And it's true that in a way that gaze gives them something back to themselves. And to come back to one of the questions before, it's true that again, it wasn't deliberate, but from the start, this poetic writing, I realized later on, helped to make the violence of the stories more sort of acceptable in a way. Not acceptable, but it sort of helps bring the reader into the books and in a way maybe sort of entraps them into reading the flow of the language, and then suddenly they realize that these stories are really horrible to read, but that in a way the poetry helps, sort of is a consolation against that violence of the world that's being told and that's being created. And I think it's again, it's not deliberate. It's something that came through what I did from the start. but I realized afterwards that it's true that it's kind of a healing part of the books, is that some of them are really very harsh the stories are very harsh, but the writing helps to it helps in a way, yes. Yeah.
So maybe we can open up if there are also reactions towards this. I really feel like very strange, but yeah. And while we are waiting for the comments, so those who don't speak French, maybe this gives you the idea to enroll for an intensive French class during the summer. I mean, just to get into this, yeah. I mean, there are a lot of other languages, but as we're talking about French today.
Do you have some forms of enrollment already?
Of course, outside.
Well, first of all, thanks a lot. I think this is amazing. I think we could spend another, at least that's how I feel, I could spend another 3 hours listening to you, and I'm not saying this out of politeness, because I think it's very... you said enchanting. So I'm wondering if there is an audio version of either in English or in French, because you also have a very beautiful way of reading. But that's not my question. My question is, and I think it relates probably to both books, because what I find quite pertinent is how you said a bit concerning the first book, how you were considering the language question, right? Mm-hmm. So the 17 years old, which kind of slang do you then adopt? Yeah. And in a sense you didn't, but still, I mean, it's this Rimbaud kind of verse of not taking the 17-year-old seriously, but at the same time, I think you are taking these 17 years old very seriously, and one can really see the kind of the thuggishness of the particular, well, the male, and I think as well as the female character. So the kind of the boastfulness in even the kind of ideas of a 17-year-old adolescent, and at the same time the despair and the tragedy, which I think, and probably it's the same in the girl character. And I'm wondering, so now here comes the question. so how do you put yourself into these shoes? Because I mean, you have in the first book, so you have 4 different perspectives, and you, on the one hand, they are, as Ute said, they are isolated, but of course they are also interlinked, because you have different perspectives on a similar, not only the trou marrant, but also the similar characters, but then you have very particular kind of voices. So I'm wondering how you kind of, is that a music that helps you to kind of, do you have a soundtrack for each for each character? And as well for the girl child, now in your second novel, as well as, I think, because you are working through very different, well, here we are in a case system, so very different social class, but also gender-wise, and also in terms of social milieu. So I'm quite struck by the challenge of actually taking these very, very different perspectives.
Thank you.
And well, I think we heard how the poetry carries you through the text, and how it carries us, I think, through the text as well. But I'm wondering how that works then, taking very different perspectives. And thank you once again.
Okay, well, thank you for that question, which has 2 parts. I'll try to remember how to address both parts. One is about the observation and maybe my anthropological background and different cultural backgrounds also. So that's one of the parts. The other part about putting yourself in the different characters. I mean, this is something that I've done since I was very, very young. And my first collection of short stories, which I wrote between the ages of 17 and 19. In each one, I was saying I, but the I's were every time different characters, and some of them were. One of them was a 40-year-old man, and one, I was still an adolescent. One of them was an old woman. One of them some of them were younger characters. So it's been part of the fascination with writing, to me, who was an extremely shy child of a village in Mauritius, where the world was actually only in the imagination, because at that time we didn't have television, we didn't have much contact with the outside world, except through reading. So the world of books created my universe in a way. Definitely, this was the origin story of myths, stories, books, were the sort of trigger, probably, and silence also of my sort of inner nature of being contemplative. So I had to bring the world to me through my writing, and that was the way I sort of traveled through the world, or created the world, by becoming other people and saying I. So this was something which was probably subconscious, or I don't know how it happened, but it happened. And it's something that's followed me, because whenever I write, I have an idea about a book, a novel. Until I've found the voice of the narrator, I can't write the book. And in particular, the book, Le Saint-River, which you have here, it's a story that I had probably since childhood in my mind. And when I started writing seriously, I thought, I must tell that story. And I wrote it 3 times from different points of view, saying I. And the first 2 times the first time I wrote the whole novel and then left it. The second time I started it and left it because I realized it wasn't what I wanted. And it's many, many years later that suddenly I thought I could write it from that particular point of view, and then it came very easily. So it had to be the voice first. The story was there. It had to be the voice. Once I found the voice, it was I could write it very, very easily. So in a way, for F de ces décombres also, I had started writing it thinking maybe I'll write it in the 3rd person. And then again, it was something I felt I had to get into the mind and in a way be inhabited by these characters and inhabit them as well. But then once I had the character of Eve, she couldn't be alone in that story. She had people around her, and I had to have these other voices. And also at one point when she's talking about herself, I realized that she's talking about herself as the predator, the one who chooses, the one who's not a victim. And somewhere inside my mind I was saying, but you are a victim in a way. And I realized that there was another voice needed, which were the passages in italics where someone else is saying, but this is what's happening to you. And so there was a sort of 5th voice in that book. But again, this is... I wouldn't have been able to write it in a language, sort of slang of today, whether in French or Creole. I wouldn't know this enough. And at the same time, slang tends to date a book because they change. Languages, these kinds of day-to-day language change very quickly, and then suddenly you find that these words, these terms are not used anymore. So in a way, by trying to sort of express the language of their subconscious, I was going to I could use any kind of that poetic language, or philosophical, or very violent. So in fact, it sort of all fitted together, even saying I for each one of them. And I must say for Clélio, it's one character that I didn't really think of before, and that sort of came... We were talking about it this morning. I was saying that sometimes you start writing a novel, and when something happens that you didn't expect, a character appears that you didn't expect, or the novel pulls you into a place that you didn't think of, then you feel that it's living, it's alive, there's something beyond you as a writer that's happening there, and that's a bit magical in a way. That's the fascination and beauty of writing. And for me, when that happens, I really feel, okay, this novel is living, because there are many I wrote which didn't live and that I left in my drawers. So Clelio was a character I didn't expect. But when he came with his language, with his voice, with his this kind of violence and all that. So, and for the novel published last year, again, I mean, I was telling about the story, the inspiration, but again, I had to find the heart of the novel, which, of course, it's Cinti, but who's telling the story? And when I found this hijra, the transsexual telling the story, it cohered, it came together. And I know India, I mean, I'm sort of, my great-grandparents came from India, but I haven't lived there for a long time, but culturally I've been seeped into that culture, and I've been there several times. But the problem that we now face as writers, what I'm talking about, this magical aspect, you can be anybody and everybody. In fact, today we're finding ourselves more and more hemmed in by identities, by the questioning of identities. And as an example, this novel, Le Rire des Déesses, my publisher, sent it to different publishers around the world, and an American publisher replied to her saying, we love the novel, but the narrator is a transsexual, and the author isn't. And it could be problematic for us to publish this. So I was talking about it this morning, that in a way, being an artist means you are without identity in a way. I mean, of course you have your identity, but you can be the other. You can understand the other. You can make that step out of yourself. Now we are being hemmed in and censored because of who we are, because of our identity. And this is very, very dangerous. I think that this is a very bad path we're going through, and I'm glad I didn't start writing now, because that would have been a problem.
Maybe just to add quickly to this, we talked also about this a little bit this morning. There's another book that was published last year, the Deux Marmites Deux Mâles et une Marmite, 2 suitcases and 1 cooking pot, which is a mix, I would say, in between with sort of biography, but also about thinking about writing and how writing accompanies or is part of your life and your experiences. And in this essay novel biography, you coined the word vivre écrire in one word. So living writing, making one word of it, and also it comes up several times as devenir l'autre, to become someone else. So this is also something that what you were just talking about as an artist or as a writer. Or you're looking for this voice, and then it becomes this living. I mean, you step into this other person, or you become this voice, and this is why you can then tell this story. Which was, I also recommend you, by the way, but this has not been translated.
No, but yeah. I mean, just to add on that, I think that all the arts and literature and the novel, people often said the death of the novel and all that, these are voices which are necessary, because we are sort of inundated with voices. I think with the social networks and all that, it's liberated a kind of freedom of maybe freedom of expression is a positive thing, but if you're writing without even thinking, when you think a writer is thinking of a word for, over hours, and then in social media, whatever you think you're writing, and very often it's a violent type of freedom, of sometimes a language of hate, a language of violence. This kind of expression is to me, goes counter against everything that for us writers or artists who are thinking about things, you want to think about what you're saying, which will stay. You don't want to sort of throw everything you want to write. And so at least in novels, you are not forcing, but bringing the reader into a world that is unfamiliar, but making them think and live with these characters and be these characters even for 1 hour or 1 week or whatever, which we don't have if we're listening to the news well, we don't even listen to the news now. It's, I don't know how you get news, with on your telephone screen or something like that. But this is very fugitive and superficial, So, okay, bomb has exploded somewhere, killing 100 people. Does it say something to you emotionally? It doesn't. Okay, you're concerned, but you don't feel it. Whereas if you're in a book and you are being the child cowering under a wall and hearing the noise of the bomb coming, or you are the man who is going to, push the button to explode the bomb, you're going to be with that person and know where that person has come from. Even the person pushing the button to explode the bomb is a human being, so you have to know what brought him to that. And the only way to have any kind of answers to these questions is to understand what brought somebody to a particular situation. And I think the novels finally do manage to do that, even though it's fiction, which all the news, 24-hour news we have, do not help us understand the others, do not help us to understand the other. And this is very important. So if something is preventing us from doing that, it's very, very dangerous, because it's only one type of voice which will come out.
I can just remind you that in the beginning I said she wrote 26 novels, so this is a very big universe of with a lot of different, others and voices that are there to follow and to discover. Are there questions? Maybe we can come to a last round, or if there's still some questions or comments. It's really, I feel like on a boat. No, not, maybe. I think, no. Yeah, so I think we can come to an end now. So Ananda, thank you very much again.
Thank you.
It was a real pleasure.
Thank you all.
Almost like for the stage, it's like that, one more. But then maybe I give you, there's a small, maybe this could be your entrance. I brought also this Ceux du Large, which is in 3 languages, so in French, in English, and also in Creole. Poems. You can have a look at it, but this can also be, 3 languages is easy to learn then and to switch from one language to the other. Okay, but yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I think we might have a moment for exchange, and you might have a look at my books, but please leave them here. I still need them for the next classes. Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you for coming, and I hope you enjoyed that.